Winterfell stood quiet under the soft fall of snow. The wind whispered through its ancient walls, and the great weirwood tree in the godswood swayed gently, as if it remembered everything that had passed, and everything that hadn't. Years ago, Ned Stark was meant to die on the steps of Baelor's Sept in King's Landing. His head was to be taken by Sir Ilyn Payne, and the North was to lose its warden. But something changed that day. Maybe it was mercy. Maybe it was fate. Or maybe Varys had pulled a string he never told anyone about. Either way, the sword never came down. Ned Stark lived. He was sent to the wall instead, his name stripped, his honor shattered. But his life spared. Jon Snow had watched his father ride away to the capital, and he never saw him again. Not until now. When the war ended, when Ramsay Bolton was dead and Winterfell was reclaimed, Jon Snow and Sansa Stark stood before their people in the Great Hall. Jon had been named king in the north. Sansa had helped take back their home with fire in her eyes. Together, they brought the north back from the ashes. But no one expected the rider who came from Castle Black that frozen morning. Ned Stark stepped down from his horse, his hair greyer now, his eyes heavier, filled with memories too sharp to speak of. Ghost, Jon's direwolf, was the first to move. He let out a low growl, confused, sensing something between life and death. Jon stood still. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Sansa dropped the goblet from her hand. The wine spilled across the stone like blood. "Father?" Jon whispered. "Aye," said the man who had been a ghost for so long. "I've come home." The hall was silent. Even the bannermen didn't know what to say. Was this truly Lord Eddard Stark returned from the dead? Or some trick of the Red Woman? But there was no magic, no trick, no glamour. Just a man broken by years at the wall, haunted by betrayals, and still carrying the weight of a truth he once buried deep to protect a boy not his own. Later, by the fire, Jon sat across from him. Sansa watched quietly, her eyes never leaving their father's face. "You knew, didn't you?" Jon asked. Ned looked away. "I did. About my mother. About who I am." Ned's voice was low. "You are a Stark in heart. You always were. Rhaegar may have been your blood, but Lyanna, she was my sister. And you were her dying wish. I made a promise, Jon, and I kept it. Even when it tore me apart," Jon clenched his fists. "All this time, you'd let me believe I was a bastard." "I had to," Ned said, his voice breaking. "Robert would have killed you the moment he knew. The whole realm would have seen you as a threat. I had no choice," Jon stood. "You should have told me when I was grown." "I should have. But by then, you had already hated me for not saying anything." "I thought maybe silence was safer." Sansa stepped between them, her voice calm but strong. "What matters is that he's here now, and we have a future to protect. Winterfell is ours again. The North needs all of us." Ned looked at his children. One, the daughter who had been forced to grow up in shadows and pain. The other, a boy raised as a Snow, now crowned as a king. His heart ached with pride and sorrow. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," Ned whispered. Jon looked at him, not with anger anymore, but with a deep, unspoken hurt. "Then earn it." And just like that, the family that had been torn apart by war, by lies, and by death, had taken the first step toward healing. But peace in the north never lasted long, because the winds from the east were changing again. And a dragon's shadow was slowly crawling toward Winterfell. The news of Ned Stark's return spread across the north like wildfire. Some didn't believe it. Others called it witchcraft. But the faces who once followed him, lords from houses small and proud, began arriving at Winterfell. They came not just to see the man, but to ask a dangerous question. If Ned Stark was alive, then was he still Lord of Winterfell? Jon Snow had been named king in the north by those very bannermen. He had bled for the north. He had died for it and come back. And yet they now looked at the man who once ruled them and wondered if it was time to go back to the old ways. Ned noticed it. He felt the shift in the air, like a blade pressed against the back of his neck. "I did not come to take anything," he told them in the great hall. "This is Jon's home now, and Sansa's. I'm just their father." But lords like Wyman Manderley and Barbary Dustin exchanged glances. "You are more than that, my lord," one of them said. "You are the North's true heart." Ned did not smile at that. In truth, it made him sick. That night he sat alone in the crypts before the statue of Lyanna. He whispered things no one would ever hear, memories of her laughter, the weight of the promise she made him swear with her dying breath. How many lives had been broken because of love that bloomed in the wrong place? Footsteps echoed behind him. It was Sansa. "You don't sleep much," she said softly. Ned nodded. "The dead don't let me rest." She sat beside him, her red hair shining like fire in the torchlight. "Do you miss it?" "Being Lord Stark?" He looked at her. "Every day. But I also remember the cost. And I wouldn't take that crown back, not for anything. Jon is better for it." "You are better." Sansa stayed silent for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice cooler than before. "Not everyone sees it that way. Some of them think you're the North's only hope." He sighed. "I didn't come back to start another war." She nodded. "Neither did I, but war doesn't need a reason. It just needs doubt." The next day, tensions grew sharper. Lord Serwyn arrived with 24 men and demanded a private audience with Ned. He asked outright if Ned would reclaim his seat as Warden of the North. "I am no one's warden," Ned replied. "The North chose Jon, and the North must stay united." But Lord Serwyn was not the only one whispering. In dark corners, they said Jon was half a Targaryen, that Sansa was too clever, too cold, just like her mother. That a bastard king was one thing, but a dragon-blooded king, that was something far more dangerous. Then, just when the whispers couldn't get louder, a raven came from the east. Daenerys Targaryen had landed at Dragonstone. She had summoned Jon Snow to bend the knee. Sansa read the message twice, her lips tightening. "She wants him to come alone." Jon stared at the parchment. "She's coming for the throne." "She wants allies." Ned's voice was firm. "She's Rhaegar's sister." "Your blood." Jon looked down. "That's what scares me." Sansa folded her arms. "And what will you do?" "Kneel to her." "A dragon queen who knows nothing of the North?" Jon didn't answer. Instead, he looked at Ned. "I need your advice," he said. For a moment, Ned said nothing. Then he looked his son, no, his nephew, straight in the eye. "You need to go," he said. "See her yourself. Look her in the eye. Decide not as a Stark, not as a Targaryen, but as a man who knows what war will cost." Jon frowned. "You trust her?" "I trust you to find out if she's worth trusting," Ned replied. Before dawn the next day, Jon rode south, and as he disappeared over the hills, Sansa turned to her father. "What happens if she makes him choose?" she asked. Ned didn't blink. "Then we'll find out what matters more to Jon Snow, his blood, or his people." Winter was here, but something far colder was coming, not from the snow, not from the south, but from beyond the wall. The raven came at night. It arrived soaked in ice, wings trembling, eyes wide with something that even birds should never feel: fear. Sansa read the message first. Her fingers shook as she unfolded the parchment. The ink was blotched, rushed, but the words were enough to freeze her blood. "Eastwatch has fallen." She walked through Winterfell's long hallway, each step echoing in the silence of early dawn. Her father was already awake. Ned stood in the godswood, snow collecting on his shoulders like a crown of ash. She handed him the message. He didn't flinch as he read. "They're real," he said quietly. "The White Walkers, the dead. They're not just stories." Sansa nodded. "And they're coming." For a moment neither spoke. There was nothing left to say. The war Jon feared was already at their doorstep, and he was far away, riding through the south toward dragons and queens, not knowing that death had already begun its march. Later that morning, Maester Volkan gathered the lords in the great hall. Some didn't believe the raven. Others laughed it off as a trick by the south. But Sansa stood at the front of the hall beside her father, with her voice sharp as Valyrian steel. "If you still think the real war is over thrones and crowns," she said, "you're already dead." Her eyes moved across the room, landing on the same men who once doubted her, who whispered behind her back that she was nothing more than a pretty face scarred by the capital. But today they listened, because behind her stood Ned Stark, the man they once followed to war, the man who bled honor and silence. He took a single step forward, I once believed the world was ruled by men who followed laws, duty, and justice, Ned began. But the world taught me otherwise. I watched the South murder children and call it peace. I saw kings burn cities and call it victory. I thought I had seen the worst this world had to offer. He paused. But now comes a war not for power, but for survival. Against an enemy that doesn't sleep, doesn't stop, and does not care if you are a lord or a bastard. Whispers filled the hall. Fear moved like a wind. Then the doors burst open. Arya Stark walked in. Face windburned, blade on her back, eyes sharp. She looked older than the girl Ned remembered, harder, colder. Like someone who had danced with shadows and won. Eastwatch isn't just lost, she said. I've seen what comes behind them. Dead men, hundreds, thousands. A giant made of bone, wolves without skin, and something at the center. A king of ice. Ned stepped forward, his breath catching in his throat. Arya! She nodded once. I found my way back. The hall erupted into voices. Lord shouting, some panicking, others demanding swords be raised. But it was Arya's quiet words that silenced them all. If we don't stand together, we'll die alone. That night in the quiet of his chambers, Ned sat across from Arya. You've changed, he said gently. So have you, she replied. They both smiled. But there was sadness in it. Does Jon know? She asked. Not yet. Then we need him back. Before it's too late. But Jon was far away, walking deeper into the trap of southern politics, unaware of what the true north was becoming. Sansa gathered the maesters. Send ravens to every house. Tell them to prepare. Arya sharpened her blade. Ned rode to the armory and called the blacksmiths, and in the cold night Winterfell came alive, preparing not for rebellion, not for conquest, but for the end of the world. And somewhere beyond the wall, in the blizzard-swept darkness, a horn sounded once, then twice, then 3 times. The dead were here. The cold in Winterfell was no longer just winter. It had teeth, the kind that bit through armor and skin alike. Each morning they woke up to harder frost, thicker fog, and ravens that either didn't come back or returned silent, their scrolls half frozen, unreadable, but the north was awake. Blacksmiths worked through the nights. Spears tipped with dragonglass were stacked high in crates. Sansa sent riders to every loyal house, calling bannermen to prepare. Ned rode with Arya to the nearby villages, making sure every soul was moved behind the walls. It was slow work, painful, and worse, many didn't believe them. They're just old stories, a farmer told Ned one afternoon. My grandfather used to scare us with tales of the White Walkers. They're not tales, Ned replied. They're marching. The man hesitated. But Arya didn't. If you don't believe us, she said coldly, then wait and see what comes. But don't expect mercy when it finds you. That night, Sansa stood atop Winterfell's wall and watched the black sky. Her fingers were numb, her lips cracked from the cold. But she never looked away. Ned came up beside her, wrapping a heavy fur over her shoulders. You've become strong, he said. She smiled a little sadly. I had to. You've become more like your mother, he added. Sansa looked up. She would have been proud of Arya, too, he nodded. She would have been proud of all of you. A pause. Then she asked, do you think Jon will come back in time? Ned's jaw tightened. He'll come. But even as he said it, a shadow of doubt crossed his face. Far to the south, Jon Snow stood before Daenerys Targaryen in the stone halls of Dragonstone. Her dragons roared in the distance. Her voice was calm but full of fire. You are the last male heir of House Targaryen, she said. Aegon Targaryen. That makes you more than just a king in the north. You are the heir to the Iron Throne. Jon clenched his fists. I never wanted a throne. I came to warn you about the real threat, the army of the dead. They're already coming. And I believe you, Daenerys said, stepping closer. But if we are to face them, we must stand together. I offer you more than just an alliance. Jon knew what she meant. It wasn't just politics anymore. He looked at him not just as an ally, but as something else. He looked away. I can't think about us, not now. My family needs me, Daenerys sighed. You are family to me now, Jon, whether you accept it or not. But Jon's mind was already drifting, northward, to the cold, to Winterfell, to Sansa, to the father he had thought dead, to the sister he had barely seen, and to the sound of horns, 3 blasts in the night. He left Dragonstone the next morning. Mounted on Rhaegal, the green dragon, he flew north, the wind slicing through him, the snow already falling thick. But even as he flew toward home, Winterfell was preparing for war without him. Arya took command of the outer walls. She trained farmers, old men, and even children to stab low, not high. "They don't bleed like we do," she told them. "Aim for the spine, or the eyes." Ned oversaw the gate defenses, his mind torn between the commander he used to be and the father he was trying to become again. Sansa. She handled the politics. She kept the lords from arguing. She made sure the wounded had beds. She fed the troops. She controlled everything inside the walls with cold grace. One night, Arya found Ned standing alone, staring at the sword ice, reforged now into 2 blades. He held the hilt of one, Oathkeeper, and sighed. "I should have died in King's Landing," he whispered. "But you didn't," Arya said, stepping up beside him. "And now we need you more than ever." Ned turned. His voice was low. "If I fall in this war, promise me something." "What?" "Don't run. Don't hide. Don't become someone else." Arya stared at him. "I'm already someone else," she whispered. "But for you, I'll stay Arya Stark until the end." And just then, in the far distance, a horn blew, 1 long blast, then another, and a third. They were here. The horns didn't stop. They blew again and again, until the walls of Winterfell shook with their sound. Soldiers dropped what they were doing. Women grabbed their children. Blacksmiths let their fires die, and even the direwolves began to howl. The dead had come. Ned Stark stood on the battlements, his fur cloak flapping behind him. Snow stuck to his beard, but he didn't feel the cold anymore. Not now, not with what he saw on the horizon, a black wave, silent, endless. It wasn't an army, it was death given legs. Arya appeared beside him, her eyes narrowed, already calculating. "If we fall back to the inner walls, we can buy time," Ned nodded. "Tell the archers. No flaming arrows until you see their eyes." She raised an eyebrow. "They don't have eyes, father." "Then aim for where they should be," he said grimly. Inside, Sansa moved through the halls like a queen. "Calm on the surface, fire underneath." She ordered the gates sealed, sent Maester Wolkan to the crypts with the children. She didn't hesitate, not once. Brienne of Tarth stood in the great hall, sword drawn. Podrick was beside her. The Hound leaned against a pillar nearby, grumbling under his breath. "This is madness," he spat. "We're all going to die in this frozen shithole. Then we'll die fighting," Brienne said simply. Sansa approached them. "Keep the main hall secure. If the outer walls fall, this is our last defense. You really think that wall of stone will stop them?" The Hound growled. "No," Sansa replied. "But we will." Outside, the dead began to charge, not with war cries, not with drums, just silence, cold, relentless, thousands of them. Their bones cracking with every step. Their eyes, blue like frozen fire. Ned raised his hand. "Archers!" The sky lit up with flaming arrows. Dozens of whites dropped. Dozens more replaced them. Arya jumped from the wall, vanishing into the night, blade in hand. A shadow, a whisper, a Stark made of fury and silence. The first impact hit the gates like a mountain. Wood splintered. Metal screamed. Men flew backward like dolls, but the North didn't run. They fought and they fell and they fought again. In the chaos, Ned moved like a ghost. He swung his sword, not like a young knight, but like a man who had spent a lifetime in war. Every strike was clean. Every cut meant to end. But they just kept coming. At one point he slipped in the snow. A white lunged at him. He looked up and saw teeth. Then a blur of red and steel tackled the creature away. "Arya!" "You're too old for this," she growled. "Helping him up. I've been too old since Robert's rebellion," Ned muttered, brushing himself off. Somewhere above, a great roar echoed. Rhaegal, Jon had arrived. He came crashing through the clouds on Dragonback, his face tight, his eyes locked on the battlefield. Behind him came Daenerys, atop Drogon. The dragons rained fire down upon the dead, lighting up the field like the sun had returned. Whites burned. Snow melted. The North roared with new hope. Inside the castle, Sansa heard the noise and looked up through the shattered window. Her breath caught. He came back, but something else came with him, a shape moving through the fire, tall, pale, eyes burning like blue ice. The Night King. He walked straight through the flames, untouched, and Winterfell held its breath. Jon leapt off Rhaegal, charging through the bodies, sword drawn, aiming for the icy figure that seemed to welcome him. But the Night King only smiled and raised his hand, the dead around. Jon began to rise again, friends, soldiers, even Northmen who had just fallen. Jon screamed, swinging wildly. The dead closed in. Ned saw it. He saw his son, his blood surrounded, fighting alone, and for the first time in years. He didn't hesitate. He ran, through the snow, through the fire, through the wall of dead men, straight toward Jon. The world became a blur of ice, steel and screams. Ned Stark ploughed through the horde like a storm reborn. His blade, Oathkeeper, was slick with black blood, steaming in the freezing air. He cut down one wight after another, never stopping, his breath burning in his lungs. His heart was pounding, not with fear, but with purpose. He had failed once in the south, trying to save honor. He would not fail here, trying to save his son. Jon fought like a man possessed, Longclaw flashing in the firelight. But the dead never stopped. Every time he cut one down, two more took its place. He was knee-deep in corpses. His shoulder was bleeding. His legs buckled. His breath came ragged. Then a sword cleaved through the white behind him. Jon turned and froze. "Father," Ned grunted, grabbing Jon by the shoulder and yanking him back. "You're late," Jon blinked, heart hammering. "You shouldn't be out here. And you shouldn't have flown into a war zone on a dragon," Ned replied, swinging again, beheading another corpse. "Yet here we are." The two Starks stood back to back, surrounded by death, blades dancing like silver fire. Jon couldn't explain it, but somehow, with his father at his side, the fear didn't weigh as heavy. For a moment they weren't legends, just two men swinging swords in the cold. But the moment didn't last. A loud crack shattered the sky. Rhaegal fell from the clouds, a spear of ice lodged in his chest. The dragon screeched in agony as he crashed into the ground outside Winterfell. Breaking trees and stone alike, Daenerys screamed. Turning Drogon to the source of the attack, the Night King stood at the edge of the burning field, untouched, unmoved. His hand still raised, and this time he wasn't alone. Two wights emerged from the mist. One was a giant, the other wore the torn remnants of a Night's Watch cloak. Jon's chest tightened. "Benjen?" he whispered, but the thing that wore his uncle's face had no soul behind its eyes. The Night King pointed. The horde surged again. Inside the walls, Arya moved like a shadow, leaping from rooftop to rooftop, slashing at wights, ducking behind chimneys and towers. She had one target, one chance. Her eyes never left the Night King. Sansa watched from the great hall, heart beating like a war drum. She had never felt so useless. Every piece she had moved, every letter she had written, it meant nothing now. Outside, her family was dying. Inside, the dead were starting to breach. The crypts, once thought safe, were now screaming. The dead weren't just coming from the forest. They were rising from the ground. Sansa looked around. Children, old, men, mothers, all cornered in the halls as the once-dead Starks broke their tombs and clawed their way back. She grabbed a fallen dagger and held it close. "If this is where I die," she muttered, "then I'll die Stark." Back on the battlefield, Ned and Jon fought their way toward the Night King. The snow swirled around them. Fire lit the sky. The dead kept coming. Jon's limbs burned. He was losing strength. Ned looked at him. "You have to go," he said. "What?" "He's here for you, Jon. You know it." "You have dragon blood." "He sees it." Jon shook his head. "I won't leave you. You left once." "It saved the North." Jon hesitated, his jaw tight. "I'm not a child anymore." "No," Ned said softly. "You're a king." Then, without warning, Ned shoved Jon back hard, straight into Drogon's path. The dragon swooped down, fire erupting from his throat, shielding Jon in a wall of flame. "Go!" Ned roared. Jon turned one last time and saw his father charge alone at the Night King. It felt like watching history repeat itself, but Ned Stark wasn't the same man anymore. He didn't raise his sword and wait for mercy. He ran full speed, cutting down whites like wheat, heading straight for the monster who had brought winter to the world. And just as the Night King raised his hand again, a blur flew through the air, a dagger, Valyrian steel, straight toward his chest. But the Night King caught it. Mid-air, Arya landed behind him. Daggerless, he turned. She smirked. Didn't need that one anyway. Then she reached behind her back and drove another blade, dragonglass, into his thigh. The Night King screamed, not in pain, but in rage, and Winterfell shook. The scream that tore from the Night King's mouth wasn't human. It was the sound of 1,000 winters colliding, cold enough to freeze fire in mid-air. The ground cracked under his rage. Frost spread from his boots, crawling up the stones, turning earth to ice, blood to glass. Arya slid backward, breath fogging, her fingers bleeding from the cold. The Night King's blue eyes locked on her. He raised his hand, and every dead thing on the battlefield turned its head toward her. Ned saw it happen from across the yard. He didn't think. He just moved. He sprinted through the storm, through his own pain, through the chaos of bodies and fire. "Arya!" he shouted. She turned just as a white leapt for her. Ned's sword flashed, cutting the thing in half. He grabbed her by the arm. "Get inside." "I can't. I said inside." He barked, pushing her toward the gate. For a second she hesitated. Then she looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her eyes softened. "I thought you died a long time ago," she whispered. "I did," he said quietly, "but not tonight." He turned back toward the Night King. The creature was walking through the fire. Every step turned flame to frost. His gaze fixed on Ned now, as if he recognized him, the man who had served honor like a god and paid for it with his family. Ned tightened his grip on Oathkeeper. "I've seen kings before," he muttered. "None of them worth bowing to." The Night King raised his arm. The air grew heavy, suffocating. Then the corpses around Ned began to twitch, men he had fought beside, Northmen with Stark banners on their chests. They rose, eyes blue, jaws stiff. Ned's stomach turned. "I won't fight you," he said to them, voice shaking. "Not again." But they came anyway. He swung. He didn't think. He cut through their bodies as if he could still save them. Each face that fell made his heart break a little more. Above them Drogon circled, spewing fire that turned the night orange. Jon clung to the dragon's back, shouting orders to Daenerys. "Get to the castle. Protect the crypts." Daenerys guided Drogon downward, burning a path toward the courtyard. But the Night King lifted his spear of ice. He hurled it, faster than lightning. It missed the dragon by inches, but shattered against the gate, sending shards flying. One struck Ned's shoulder, slicing through fur and flesh. He staggered but stayed standing. Jon saw him. "Father!" Ned looked up through the snow. Their eyes met, for what might have been the last time. Jon leapt off Drogon, landing hard on the ground. He rolled, came up with long claw in hand, and ran toward the Night King. Every step felt heavier than the last. His muscles screamed, but he didn't stop. The Night King turned slowly, almost curious. Jon charged, roaring, and their blades met, ice and fire colliding with a crack that shook the heavens. For a moment Jon thought he saw fear in those blue eyes. But it wasn't fear. It was amusement. The Night King caught Longclaw in his bare hand. Frost spread down the blade, crawling toward Jon's fingers. He tried to pull back, too late. Then fire hit. Daenerys screamed from above. "Dracarys!" Drogon's fire poured down on them both. The ground exploded in light. Snow melted. The dead shrieked. The heat was unbearable. Sansa saw the explosion from the great hall. The window shattered inward from the force. She stumbled but didn't look away. The fire was everything. Hope and death at once. When the flames cleared, Jon was still there, barely standing, smoke rising from his armor. But the Night King, he was walking out of the fire, again unburned. Jon's face twisted in despair. His sword clattered to the ground, and then he heard a sound behind the Night King, soft footsteps, fast, Light Arya. She leapt again, silent as snow. Her dagger glinted, Valyrian steel. This time she didn't go for his chest. She went for his neck. The Night King turned at the last second and caught her by the throat, but he didn't see the second blade in her other hand. Arya's lips curled into a whisper. For the North. She drove the dragonglass dagger into his side, where Ned's wound had bled minutes before. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the Night King froze. Cracks of blue light spread from the wound, crawling across his body like lightning under ice. He stared at Arya, not in rage, not in fear, but in something that almost looked like surprise, and then he shattered. A wave of silence rolled through the battlefield. The dead stopped moving. Their bodies collapsed like puppets with cut strings. The wind died. The war was over. But Ned Stark was on his knees, clutching his shoulder, blood running down his sleeve. Jon ran to him. "Father," Ned smiled faintly, his breath a mist. "She did it. Arya did it." He looked toward his daughter. Her dagger was still smoking. Her eyes were empty, and for the first time in a long, long time. Ned Stark let himself breathe, but far above them, in the ruins of the sky, something glowed faintly, a sliver of blue, drifting away into the clouds. The North had won the night, but the war for its soul was just beginning. Morning didn't come easily to Winterfell. The snow had stopped falling, but the sky remained grey, like even the gods were too exhausted to bring the sun back. Smoke curled from broken towers. Blood painted the walls. What was once a great castle now looked more like a battlefield, stitched together with ice and ash. But the dead no longer moved, and that was something. Inside the great hall, they laid out the bodies, rows and rows covered in furs. Ser Davos, Lord Glover, dozens of nameless northern men, and Theon Greyjoy, his eyes finally at peace. Sansa walked among them with quiet dignity. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply touched each forehead with a shaking hand and whispered names under her breath. When she reached Theon, she stopped. "You died a Stark," she said. "And I'll never forget it." Arya stood in the shadows, her blade still at her side. People called her the girl who killed death, but she didn't feel like a hero. Her hand still hurt from where the Night King had grabbed her. Her heart beat too slowly, too quietly, as if something inside her had changed. Ned Stark was resting in the Maester's chambers. His wound had been stitched, but the infection was setting in. He refused milk of the poppy. He wanted to feel it. Every pain, every throb, every reminder that he had lived. Jon sat beside him. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then Ned broke the silence. "She saved us," Jon nodded. "She did. Your sister. She's stronger than all of us." "She had to be," Jon said quietly. Ned turned his head slowly. "What will you do now?" Jon looked at the fire. "There's still a war to the south. Daenerys wants the Iron Throne, and do you?" Ned asked softly. Jon didn't answer right away. "I don't know. I don't think I ever wanted it. But I've seen what happens when the wrong people sit on it." "Then you must ask yourself," Ned said, "if you're willing to sacrifice peace for power." Jon looked at his father. "I watched you lose everything because of honor. Do you regret it?" Ned's face went still. He stared at the ceiling for a long while. Then he said, "No, but I regret not telling you the truth. I thought I was protecting you." "I was just delaying the pain," Jon nodded slowly. "You should have told me who I was." "I should have told you who your mother was," Ned corrected. "You've always known who you are." Later that day, the people of the North gathered in the courtyard. Jon stood before them, Daenerys beside him. She wore black again, though her dragons now circled above with no one left to burn. The wind caught her silver hair, her eyes unreadable. She had fought the long night. She had helped save the realm, but the Northerners still looked at her with cold suspicion. Then Ned walked out from the hall. He limped, face pale, wrapped in furs and pain. But when the crowd saw him, they quieted. He didn't need a crown or a sword. His presence alone was enough. He stood between Jon and Daenerys, then looked out across the yard. "We are alive," he began, his voice worn but strong. And that is more than most of us dared hope." He turned to Jon. "This man fought for you when there was no one else left to fight. He died for you. He bled for you. And he came back, then to Sansa. This woman kept Winterfell standing when the world tried to tear it down. She's wiser than I ever was." Then to Arya. "And this girl, no, this woman, she ended a nightmare the world had forgotten was real." He looked at Daenerys last. "You brought fire to the cold, and for that we owe you thanks." He stepped back. "But the war isn't over. Not truly, because peace is a battle too, one you must fight every day. Not with swords, but with choices." Silence fell, then Jon stepped forward. "I am no king," he said, voice steady. "Not in the north, not in the south. I was never meant to rule. I only ever wanted to protect the people I loved." He turned to Sansa. "And I believe that's what you will do." Gasps rippled through the yard. Jon bowed his head. "The north will remain free. Sansa will rule it as queen in the north." Sansa blinked, caught off guard. But then she stepped forward, head high. "For the north," she said, "and for every name carved into Winterfell's walls." The people roared. Ned turned to Jon one last time. "Your mother would be proud of you." Jon smiled faintly. "I hope so." That night they burned the bodies. Not just for tradition, but for peace. Arya left before dawn, without a word. Her journey was far from over. Daenerys flew south, her heart conflicted, her dragon screaming into the clouds. And Jon, he remained for a while. Not as king, not as Targaryen, just a man of the north. And Ned Stark finally saw it. The boy he had raised, the secret he had carried, had become more than any prophecy could have promised. The war had taken everything from them, but in the end, they had each other.